Ed grew up in a quiet house. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the heavy kind. The rooms were clean, the voices were low. Nothing looked broken from the outside. But warmth was missing. Laughter didn't stay long. Feelings were not talked about. Comfort was rare. His parents were not cruel people. They were tired, emotionally distant, carrying their own unresolved pain. They believed food, clothes, and discipline were enough. They did not know how to notice emotions. They did not know how to sit with discomfort, theirs or Ed's. After all, Ed was just a child. When he touched things out of curiosity, he was told he was careless. When he asked too many questions, he was told he was annoying. When he got excited, he was told to calm down. When he was sad, he was told to stop being sensitive. And when he made mistakes, the kind children make, there was disappointment. Sharp, personal. What is wrong with you? Why are you so stupid? No yelling, no hitting, just words. But words can cut deep when a child's heart is still forming. Because a child doesn't hear frustration. A child hears truth. And Ed learned it early. That mistakes were not something he did. They were something he was. Over time, Ed stopped reacting. Not because things hurt less, but because showing it felt unsafe. When he was corrected, he didn't protest. When he was misunderstood, he didn't explain. When he was hurt, he went quiet. Inside, something slowly shifted. No one helped him understand his feelings. No one separated his behavior from his worth. No one reminded him that mistakes are part of being a child. Affection became inconsistent, offered when he was easy, withdrawn when he wasn't. Love didn't disappear completely, but it became conditional. Enough for a child to notice, enough for a child to adapt. So Ed became careful. Not careful with rules. Careful with himself. He learned to shrink his needs. He learned to mute his excitement. This is how toxic shame forms. Not in a single moment, but in repeated experiences where a child is corrected without compassion, judged without repair, and left alone to explain emotional absence. Toxic shame is not the belief I made a mistake. It is the belief I am the mistake. And once learned, it becomes the voice that stays long after childhood ends. Psychology has a name for what Ed learned. The term toxic shame was described by Sylvan Solomon Tompkins, a psychologist and personality theorist who studied how emotions shape identity. In his affect theory, Tompkins made an important distinction between shame that guides a child and shame that wounds them. Healthy shame is brief. It tells a child, I did something inappropriate. It points to behavior and it allows repair. Toxic shame does something else. It settles deeper. It tells the child, I am inappropriate. Instead of guilt, it creates a lasting sense of worthlessness, humiliation, and self-loathing. Not because of a single mistake, but because these feelings are formed again and again through repeated emotional injuries. In environments where correction replaces care, where emotions are dismissed instead of held, shame stops being a signal and becomes an identity. This is the kind of shame Ed learned, not as a lesson, but as a belief about who he was. Unlike healthy shame, toxic shame does not stay attached to a moment. It slips into the darker corners of the mind and slowly reshapes how a person sees themselves. Often it hides in the unconscious so well that a person may not even realize shame is operating beneath their thoughts and reactions. They only feel the weight of it, the intensity, the pain, the sudden collapse of self-worth. For someone carrying toxic shame, an external trigger is not always necessary. A single thought can be enough. A memory, a tone of voice, an imagined mistake. The mind learns to recreate the feeling on its own. Over time, this can lead to what is sometimes called shame anxiety, not just feeling shame, but living with a constant fear of experiencing it again. A fear of being exposed, a fear of being seen, a fear of making even the smallest mistake. And so the cycle continues, not because the person is broken, but because shame was never allowed to pass through. It was taught to stay. In Ed's case, the deepest trap toxic shame created was not a single thought, but a belief. I am unlovable. I am not worthy of love. Once that belief took root, other thoughts followed easily, almost automatically. I'm stupid. I'm a failure. I'm not enough. I'm defective. I don't matter. I hate myself. These were not dramatic thoughts. They felt factual to him. Quiet, constant. Toxic shame does this. It turns judgments into identities. Ed did not arrive at these beliefs because he wanted to. He arrived there because, again and again, his emotional needs were met with disappointment, withdrawal, or indifference. His parents did not intend to harm him, but their reactions, sharp words, emotional distance, lack of comfort, taught him something powerful. When Ed struggled, he was left alone with it. When he failed, there was no reassurance. When he was disappointed in himself, no one helped him hold that feeling. A child does not interpret emotional absence as parental limitation. A child interprets it as personal unworthiness. The message Ed absorbed was simple and devastating. If the people who are supposed to love me most pull away when I fail, then I must not be worth loving at all. That is how toxic shame pulls a child into a spiral, not through cruelty alone, but through unmet emotional needs during moments of vulnerability. Research shows that toxic shame is most often formed and reinforced in childhood, not only at home, but also through experiences at school with teachers, peers, and other authority figures. Repeated criticism, humiliation, neglect, or any form of emotional, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse can deepen it. Psychologists recognize toxic shame as a core pattern underlying many mental health struggles, including chronic depression, anxiety, eating disorders, aggression, and bullying. It shapes how a person relates to themselves long before it shapes how they relate to others. In children like Ed, toxic shame often shows itself quietly. Low self-esteem, a persistent sense of unworthiness, chronic guilt without a clear cause, shame about their body, their voice, their emotions, their existence. As they grow older, some try to numb that shame through withdrawal, perfectionism, people-pleasing, or harmful coping behaviors, not because they are weak, but because the shame feels unbearable. This is why it is important for parents to understand toxic shame. Children must never be taught, directly or indirectly, to connect mistakes, failures, or wrongdoings to their core identity. Because a mistake can be corrected, but a belief like I am unlovable can follow a child for a lifetime. For Ed, the lessons of shame did not stay confined to home. They followed him into the classroom. You see, the words and actions of an insensitive teacher can deeply shape a child's early educational experience and for a child already carrying shame, certain classroom practices can quietly reinforce it. Ed learned early that public correction felt dangerous. Being singled out, spoken to harshly, or treated as a problem did not teach him responsibility. It confirmed his fear of being defective. Moments like being reprimanded in front of others, hearing demoralizing remarks, or being physically isolated in the classroom did not feel like discipline to Ed. They felt like exposure, like proof that something about him was wrong. Instead of learning how to reflect on his emotions, Ed learned to suppress them. Instead of separating mistakes from identity, he absorbed them into his sense of self. What Ed needed, and what research consistently supports, was empathy. Adults who could model emotional understanding. Parents who could help children explore their internal experiences without shame. Guidance that focused on behavior while protecting dignity. When children are invited to understand consequences rather than fear them, shame loosens its grip. When rules are explained, discussed, and created together, children feel included rather than controlled. But Ed rarely experienced this. Authority felt distant. Correction felt personal. Over time, the same belief followed him everywhere. I am unlovable. I am not worthy of love. This is the ultimate mental trap of toxic shame. Not the memory of being corrected, but the identity that forms around it. For children like Ed, healing does not come from more discipline or harsher standards. It comes from adults who are willing to intervene, parents, teachers, caregivers, who understand that seeking professional help is not a failure, but an act of responsibility. Ed's parents, like many others, believed encouragement meant pushing harder or invoking shame in the name of character. But phrases meant to correct behavior often reinforced the wound. Respect was replaced with judgment, guidance with humiliation. Children do not learn self-respect through shame. They learn it through being treated with dignity. As parenting educators have noted, we cannot fully shield children from being shamed by the world. But we can teach them that shame is not acceptable and that it does not define them. When children know this, they are more likely to set boundaries, speak up, and seek support. And perhaps most importantly, protecting children like Ed from toxic shame requires adults to face their own, to look back at how they were treated, how shame shaped them, and how easily it is passed down without intention. Because when shame goes unexamined, it repeats. And when it is named and understood, it can finally stop.